Hello, friends. Welcome to the art and craft of amazing photo portraits. My name is Chris Orwig, and I am a photographer, author, and teacher. And there's a picture of one of my most recent books, which I'm super proud of, Authentic Portraits. I'm also an ambassador for Sony, and I love portraiture. And whenever I'm seeking to capture a portrait, whether it's of a celebrity like this, or of a fashion designer, or of one of my friend's sons, I'm always searching for specific things. I'm looking for a certain feeling in my frames. This is a photograph of Ben Harper, the singer and songwriter. Here's an actress, a famous surfer. And with all of these photographs, what I'm searching for, I think, are these things. I want them to be authentic, simple, soulful, and strong. And so as I'm using my camera, I'm looking to make that connection. I'm looking to capture that feeling or that vibe. And the question with all of this is, how can we do more of this? How can we capture more meaningful, more amazing, more compelling portraits? Because portraiture really is a craft. It doesn't come easily. Any of us who have experimented with portraiture know that we can point a camera at someone or something, in this case, a poet, Diego Young on the right, one of my favorite poets, or a wolf on the left. And typically, when we try to capture portraits, they don't turn out like this right away. But there is a process that can get you there. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because typically what happens is we start off like this. We say, I love portraits, great. I think it's amazing. Yet the picture just looks kind of goofy. I mean, it's a great subject, great light, great moment, but somehow it's not there. It's kind of that starting point. And my question really is, and it has been my whole career as a teacher and photographer, is how can we go from this to that? In other words, how can we go from that starting point, which is goofy and awkward and who knows what, to something which is maybe even profound? And how can we do so with minimal gear and with natural light? Sometimes it means we need to kind of find the photograph. We need to get closer. We need to kind of explore the scene until we really create that connected and beautiful moment. In other situations, maybe we get the moment right out of camera, but we need to use a tool like Lightroom, which is what I had to use here with this photograph to make it snap and pop and come to life. Other times, maybe it's about using Lightroom and Photoshop together to clean up the sand and warm up the light and create a more, more magnificent mood. It's always a result of craft. And so what I want to do is share with you 5 tips which will help you to improve your own process and craft. And I want to share a few workflow examples using Lightroom and Photoshop. All right. So for the 5 tips for more awesome portraits, here they are at a glance. Let's dig into them one at a time. The first one is we really need to awaken the artists within. And here's why. The cameras or the phones that we have, they allow us to capture great images, and they are completely unbiased, objective, accurate, and amazing. They make good photographs really easy, but great photographs are incredibly hard. We can take out our camera and point it in a direction. This is my best friend and his son, and it's good, but it's not necessarily like this, which has something more. We're always striving for that something more. And what I've come to discover is that great photographs are less about looks and they're more about feel. And so when my assignment, say, is to capture an engagement photograph of some family friends that just got engaged, it's not about how engagement looks, it's about how it feels. I want to capture the feeling of just having gotten engaged and all of that hope and excitement and happiness, right? Or if my assignment is to capture a portrait of a personal hero of mine, well, I might start out here, have a little reflector, red brick wall. Brick is really cliche. Typically in portraiture, they say avoid fences, brick, and graffiti. So there I was, not a good start, but that's where I want to go. I know there's more. And when we awaken the artist within, we start to ask those questions, which are questions like, well, what if? Well, what else? What could I do in this situation? And it's always a process, right? It's always a craft. And you can see the first image, the second, the third, and then the fourth, which is so much better. So really, how do we get there? So in this case, another assignment, let's say I'm on that outdoor adventure portrait and I want to capture this person who does all this backcountry skiing and mountaineering. And there he is in his element in the snow, way up in the backcountry, and it's disconnected. I have to connect. I have to engage. I have to arrange myself and the photograph. And that's what artists do. They take that extra little bit of effort. We cannot rely on our cameras or our phones anymore. They are good, but they're objective. We need to be subjective. We need to be an artist. We need to create. Here's another one with a vintage shoe designer and owner of a company's CEO, someone I admire deeply. Here he is in this cool car, and this is the shot. It doesn't do much for me, but the artist says, "Well, hey, let me give this some time. Let me think about this. Let me engage. Let me connect. Let me try to create something meaningful," because art is not about outward appearance. It's about inward significance, as Aristotle once said. So my first tip for you is the next time you go shooting is to ask yourself, well, how can I awaken the artist within? How can I stir that up? How can I do a little bit more? How can I go from this to that? Okay. The second tip is to get closer. One of the things I've discovered over the years, and I've taught thousands of students at workshops, and I used to teach at the university level for about a decade, is that 90% of mediocre photos are captured the same way. They're too far away. And what I mean by that is this. Here's one of my own mediocre photographs. This is my buddy Matt up in the mountains. I'm trying to capture this cool outdoor adventure portrait of him, but I'm just too far away. He's too low in the scene as well. So then I try to get closer. I also get lower, so then he appears taller. Do you see the difference there? He's now above the kind of the beach line or the coastal line. Then I do that. I get even closer, and all of a sudden, I have a more meaningful frame. Now, proximity or closeness, there is a physicality to it. So it is literal, but it's also metaphorical. So what we do is we say, here, I'm a little disconnected. I'm too far away emotionally, but also there's a practically I'm too far away. Now this, I'm much more connected. I'm much more engaged. And so is the viewer. And that's really what we have to do. Now, here I am on vacation with my iPhone, and my kids are in the water. We just got there, and it's so fun. We're in Hawaii, and I capture the image because I'm so excited. And that's why we take photographs. We're excited. Oh my gosh, wow. But we often have to then say, well, am I close enough? I may be excited, but the camera isn't. So I need to awaken the artist within. I need to get closer. And then we get to a photograph like this. Can you see the difference? Here's the shot, the snapshot, and here's the photograph, which is so much better, so much more engaged. And so this is true regardless of what we're doing, whether we're photographing kids or maybe we're in Yosemite and it's this beautiful rainy day and we're at the lookout point and we walk up and there's these people taking pictures and lots of people and crowds. And I don't even know what to photograph. I'm just trying. And I love how photographers use umbrellas and get innovative. And finally, I see this one guy who I really like, the guy covering his camera with his umbrella, almost like it's his little, I don't know, his friend or something. That's the shot. So I just have to get closer to that. And that often is how we capture those photographs. We figure out what is it that is exciting us, and then we get closer to it. And then we press the shutter release. Now, when it comes to these close-up more photographs where it's more like close-up shots like this, a couple of thoughts related to COVID, because obviously we can get closer in certain situations and others we can't. And so with close-up photographs, what I used to do was I used to always shoot with an 85 millimeter focal length lens because the working distance was about 6 feet. But now I'm shooting with much longer focal length lenses, like I'm using my 135 or 70 to 200. The 135, my working distance is about 8 to 10, which is a much more comfortable working distance for everyone. Because here's what can happen when you're shooting. You have this sense of space, but sometimes you can get too close, or you can also get too far away, or you can bump into things because you're holding that camera up to your eye. So in our current context, what I recommend you do is lean towards using longer focal length lenses so you can still be connected to your subject, but you can work at that nice, comfortable, safe distance. All right, so tip number 2, that one is all about getting closer. You ready for tip number 3? This one's about connecting and directing. Now, in portraiture, sometimes people think, it's all about posing, but it isn't, because when you point a camera at someone, they are either going to freeze or they're going to fake it. And what that means is they're like the deer in the headlights, or they're over exaggerating the way they pose, or maybe they're trying to look cool or sophisticated or strong or beautiful or whatever it is. Now, it's our job as portrait photographers to start off with where they're at, like disinterested, and to get them somewhere else. Now, how do we do that? We do that through making the connection and then providing a touch of direction. Now, how do we connect with people? Well, really, it's all about asking them meaningful questions. How do we direct? We just slightly say, hey, maybe turn your shoulders or look towards the light. We keep it really simple. And connection, I find, always comes from asking these good questions. You don't just want to pose someone. Posing isn't enough. You have to really get to know the person. And often, again, you ask them, well, what are you studying? Where are you from? What do you do? What are your interests? And whether I'm photographing strangers, like you can see here, again, more strangers, I want to make that connection quickly. One of my friends once put it this way. He said, we need to look at others so closely and so deeply that we begin to see ourselves. You know, portraiture really is about humanity. And the best portrait subject is anyone, any human, any person, right? Because it's about the humanity within. And when we're capturing these pictures, we want to think about how we can capture who they are. Now, another tip for directing them is to provide anchoring. And this is kind of like when you're giving a talk in front of a group. If there's a lectern, you feel a lot more comfortable. It anchors you, it gives you some stability. And how do we do that in portraiture? Well, with my mom, I say, hey, mom, why don't you hold your paintbrushes? It gives her an anchor, a sense of comfort. Or I say, hey, why don't you lean against the wall or lean against your paints? Or maybe put your hand on your chin, or why don't you grab your collar? Or why don't you hold the reins of your horse or tuck your football under your arm? Why don't you hold your surfboard? Hey, why don't you put a piece of hay in your mouth? Why don't you hold a coffee cup? Lean against the wall, lean against a tree, sit down on the steps, lean against the car. You get the gist, right? I do this a lot. It really helps people to be comfortable. Otherwise, it's like they're on the stage and they're floating and they don't know what to do and they're just standing there. Where do I put my hands? How do I stand? Give them an anchor point, and your photographs, I kid you not, they will get so much better. Again, lean against the wall, sit in the car, grab the coffee cup, put your hand in a pocket. That's like a little anchor, right? Sit at the base of the tree. And so, number 3, how do we connect and direct? Well, first and foremost, we ask good questions. We inquire. We see deeply into others. And then for posing, I mean, posing 101 really is about anchoring, just giving the subject something to do, something to connect to, rather than just having them stand there and feel awkward. Does that make sense? All right. So we have covered 3 of our 5 tips. Are you ready for tip number 4? This one is all about light. And this one's about using indirect light. You know, in light or with sun or light sources, we can have light which is direct, it's complex, hard, harsh, or light which is indirect, which means it's soft, it's flattering. And typically indirect light works a lot better in portraiture. So what I do a lot of the time is I put my subjects in the shade, say shade of a building, and rather than have them face the building, have them face the light. And that brings in such beautiful light into their face and their eyes, whether it's the opening of a tent, a door, a window, whatever it is. So here it is. Subjects in the shade facing the light, in the shade facing the light, in the shade facing the light. Here they're in their doorway. So they're creating a little bit of shade by the door facing the light. In this case, I open that doorway and he's facing the light. Here he is inside of a warehouse door with surfboards behind him facing the light. Again, it's all the same thing, time and time again. And you can do this with so many different people. In this case, a model on the left, or Millie Bobby Brown, the actress, on the right. They're just in the shade and they're facing the light. And this type of portraiture or this type of lighting, it can help you create some deep and really meaningful portraits. And it's kind of comfortable for the subject, right? Because it isn't that harsh. And it gives you the ability to really make that connection, whether it's a poet or a wolf or whatever it is. Now, when the sun gets lower to the horizon, you don't necessarily want them to look towards the light. Here, the sun's kind of coming in at the side, or maybe you want the sun to come from behind the subject. And whenever you do that and you create something which is called backlight, the images have this nostalgic, kind of ethereal, beautiful, warm feeling about them. So here, again, when the sun is lower to the horizon, whether sunrise or sunset, you can really create those beautiful images there. So number 4, to reiterate, it's using indirect light to create more interesting, more soulful, and more flattering portraits. All right, you ready for our final tip? Final tip might be the most important one. And this is something that all photographers learn, and that is to adopt a yes and approach. I should say all professional, all successful photographers, they learn this, whether they know it or not. It's yes and. Here it is. You're doing a shoot and someone does a pose and you say, yes, that's good. And let's also try this. Okay, that's a good shot. It's kind of interesting. Yes. And let me shoot from the side. And it's the and that typically leads you to the better photographs. The yes is where you start, the and is where you finish. I liked when she was riding the horse, but I really wanted to show the kinship. I wanted to show the connection. I wanted to show the closeness. And that was my vision, my voice, my idea. That was awakening the artist within. It's not saying that one is better than the other for other people, but for me or for you. And that's really what you have to start to think about. So let me reiterate these 5 tips again. Here, 1 is awaken the artist within. 2, get closer. 3, connect and direct. 4, use indirect light. And number 5, adopt a yes and approach. Rather than beating yourself up when things do not turn out right, say, yes, this is good, and I'm going to try something else. All right, well, before we get to our Lightroom and Photoshop example workflows, what I want to do is highlight how we can keep in touch. If any of this is interesting to you, you can find me at chrisorwig.com, Instagram, Chris Orwig, basically any of the social channels, just my name. I have a lot of training that I've created, thousands of hours on this stuff, Chris Orwig training if you want to dig into more. And what's really cool, right inside of the Lightroom app, I have, I think, almost 50 tutorials that are free, and you can watch them step by step. And so if you have the Lightroom app on your mobile device or on your computer, you can go to lightroom.adobe.com/u/Chris Orwig, and you can check out those tutorials there. All right, so to do that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to Lightroom. We're going to work in Lightroom and also Lightroom Classic. And I just want to show you a few brief examples. With this one, this is the original raw file, and then you can see the image of where I want it to be. I want it to feel warm and nostalgic. Or this one, it looks a little lackluster and dull. I want it to be bright and beautiful. Well, how do we do that? Well, very simply, inside of Lightroom, we select the image that we want to work on, this one here. This one's all about the feeling. What does it feel like to be engaged? And we can go over to our controls, which are on the far right. You can tap the E key to open those, or just click on that little icon. And we're going to go to the light controls. We're just going to do 2 things here. We're going to work with light, and we're also going to work with effects. So my exposure is pretty good, right? I don't want to brighten it up anymore. I kind of overexposed it on camera intentionally. So I'm just going to add a little contrast, maybe bring those highlights down, bring back a little bit of detail. And really that's it. So nothing big there. But take a look at this. When we go down to effects, which is right here, we have the ability to open up the split toning controls. So you can click on this little icon and we have a shadow color and a highlight color. So with backlit photographs, I often will bring a little bit of red into my shadows, not too much, but a little bit, and then go to the highlights and bring in a little bit of yellow. Now, if we zoom out so you can see this, let me zoom back out so we can see the entirety of this. You can see this is before and after, before and then now the after. So just giving it that nice, warm, golden glow. Now we can go back to light here and say, yeah, let's also maybe brighten it up a little bit more and add a touch of contrast and try to find just the right look for it. And voila, that's it. No big deal. Sometimes it's that simple, right? Let's go to the other photograph. This one, outdoor adventure portrait. Love this picture. And here, let's say, what do we need to do? Well, the image feels a little dull, feels a little lifeless. So again, we're going to go to our edit controls and we're going to go to these settings here. And we're going to do things like, let's increase the exposure. Let's add contrast, which will also add color saturation. Let's boost those shadows, which are a little bit too dark there, so we can bring some life into them. And this is kind of helpful here, actually, because we literally have a shadow. Watch how that shadow brightens up, right? So that shadow slider brings light into those areas. And the highlights, if they're too bright, we can darken them up. Now, overall, you can see that we're getting a better look for the picture. Might go to my blacks and add a little bit of a darker look there. But again, it's not that big of a deal, just some simple adjustments. But we're taking this yes and approach. Yes, this is good. And what can I do to make it better? Yes, and let me awaken the artist within. Let me get a little creative. Let me not give up on this photograph, because the first image, it really wasn't that good. Okay, let's get to a few more examples. And to do those, I'm going to jump over to Lightroom Classic, because I know there are some people who use Lightroom Classic as well. In the settings and controls, they're very similar between the two if you haven't used one or the other, but you can see here I'm in the develop module and I'm in my basic control. So basic panel. And here we have the same controls as before, exposure, contrast, etc. And what I want to do with this is, let me try to find a zoom rate so we can see the image. This is a portrait of a stuntman. You can see how he looks kind of cool right there. I want to brighten up the shadows, right? Because it's just too dark. I want to add more exposure. No, it's too much. So I'll bring it down, add some contrast. Now with an image like this, I want kind of an edgy vibe to it. I'm going to bring the clarity up. Now in portraits, you typically don't do that, but in this one, I kind of want that. The skin tones are too bright, so I'm going to go ahead and find a spot where these values aren't quite so bright, but that's looking kind of cool. So let's zoom out so you can kind of see the image we're creating. And if I press Y, think of why did I make these adjustments? You can see that before and after. We're saving an image that was underexposed. Now, what else could we do with this? Well, here we could go to our effects panel and we could say, well, what if I added a little bit of a vignette, right? So I kind of have that mood back that we had before. What if I go to tone curve? If you're familiar with Photoshop, maybe you know about tone curve, but this one's kind of fun. What you can do is say, I'm going to brighten up my white points a little bit and then darken the deeper points. And that, as I look at it, it doesn't do that much for the image. So I'm just going to flip the switch, turn it off. No adjustment, no need to worry about that. And that's kind of the fun of these things. Last but not least, with this photograph, I'll go to my basic controls and just increase the color temperature, add a little bit of warmth there. And I think that looks better. Now, if you compare the two, let me kind of zoom in on them so you can see them side by side a little bit. You can see these different looks that we have here, right? And it's not a lot of effort. And that is the beauty of working with Lightroom. Okay, let me keep going because this is so much fun. As you can tell, I love this side of the craft of photography. And I'm going to go to this next image here, which is an outdoor adventure portrait. Actually, I'm not going to go to this one yet. I want to save that one next. I'll go to this one here. And this image, I'm going to tap the R key to access the crop tool. And I just want to remove some of the top of the image. But as I do that, it's cropping into the photograph on all sides. How do we fix that? Well, here I'll hit reset. When you access the crop tool, which you can access by clicking on this icon or tapping the R key, you can also unlock the aspect ratio, which will allow you to just freeform click and drag. I didn't really like how much headroom there was in that picture. All right, how else do we want to improve the photograph? Well, I'm noticing this area is too bright, and the overall image just maybe needs a little more contrast, maybe a little bit more warmth. Bring the shadows in, maybe add a little bit of clarity. With portraits, you got to be careful. Too much clarity, and sometimes it kind of looks over processed. I think the image looks amazing just like that. So a few slight adjustments. Let me zoom in on those because I know these are hard to see. All I did was a little bit of warmth, boost contrast, boost shadows, boost clarity. That's it. Sometimes it's like, "Oh, really, that's it?" It's like, yeah, that's it. But there's this area up here, a big area that's too bright. The eye goes to areas of brightness. So I want to darken that. So we can use this tool right here. It's called the graduated filter. The way you want to use it is go to the effect pull down menu, choose the effect you're most interested in, like exposure, then drag the value to where you want it to go. Let's say we want to darken an area or brighten an area. I'll just brighten it and show you how we can change it. Then you click and drag over part of the image. As I drag farther away, you can see that effect has a larger transition. We can also change the position of that. Now, if you hover over that little node, you can drag that around as well. Now, obviously, I do not want to brighten that, but I want to darken it, maybe decrease the highlights, add a little more contrast, add a little bit of color to that area. So warming that up so that the eye is less attracted to that part of the frame. If it's too bright on this side, I can click and drag this over here. And in doing that, you can see that now I have a little bit of the change in the look of the photograph, and it's kind of fun. All right, so here we introduced another topic. We talked about our basic controls, but we also looked at one of the tools that we have up top, in this case, the graduated filter, and that's all non-destructive. So the beauty of all of this is we can always undo any of this. Okay, well, next, let's go to this image. And I know I'm going quickly here, but really just want to kind of highlight some workflows. With this one, I'm going to talk about virtual copies. So here I'll tap the R key to select the crop tool. and I will lock down the aspect ratio. So click on that little lock, bring this in, and I'm just going to rotate. This is a photograph I took of my buddy Matt, and I just want a little bit closer look and apply that. Now, I want to process this 3 ways. One where I just open up shadows a little bit. So I'm going to go to my shadows, go to my clarity, just a touch, bring the highlights down, bring a little bit more exposure up and a little more contrast. So I'm going to say this is look number 1. Let's say I want look number 2, which isn't quite so yellow. How do we do that? Well, this is so fun. If you right click or control click on the thumbnail, you have an option which is called Create Virtual Copy. When you do that, it creates a duplicate version without any extra file size right here, right next door to it. And here I can say this one, I want to have a little bit of a cooler color temperature, little less color. So I'm desaturating this, less vibrance, less saturation, maybe more clarity, maybe more contrast, maybe deeper blacks there, and maybe a little bit brighter as well. Now, when I get to this, I realize the face is too bright. How do we fix that? Remember the graduated filter? There's also another one called the radial filter. We go to the effect that we want, like exposure. I want to darken an area, and I click and drag over that. Now, I have this little overlay graphic where whatever that's on top of, it's darkening. So I wanted to darken the highlights maybe, and a little bit of the overall exposure. Feathering means giving it a little soft edge. And so now I'm just kind of fixing that exposure on the face. All right, so that is iteration number 2. Actually, let me do one more thing here because we haven't talked about this as far as cooler tones. In Lightroom Classic, if we go to split toning, we can do the same thing as we did before, where we add a color to the shadows and a different color to the highlights. Remember for sunset, we did that. We did reds and yellows. Well, rather than reds and yellows, what if I just bring a little bit of a cooler tone into my shadows? Not quite so cool, something like that. And now I have a different version. So I have one version of the image here, another version here. Then I'll press Command apostrophe on a Mac or Control apostrophe on Windows. That's the shortcut for Create Virtual Copy. Or you can always go to the image, right click it, choose Create Virtual Copy. And then here, I'll turn off split toning and I'll go to my basic panel and just click black and white. Let's say I want a black and white version of the image. And this one, go to the graduated filter again, just trying to reiterate a few of the things we've talked about. I'm going to lower exposure and I'm going to click and drag down from the bottom of the frame on one side and then the other side, kind of creating, I don't know, a little bit of this kind of darkening effect in the lower area of the photograph. And you can see how these adjustments here, what they're doing is they're kind of bringing attention away from the lower edge of the frame, drawing us more into the subject. Now, the beauty of this kind of approach and why I wanted to show you guys this was when it comes to craft of photography, it's about iteration, right? And Lightroom, whether it's Classic or Lightroom itself, it gives us the ability to do that. Let me jump back to Lightroom real quick just to show you how you could do that there. What you can do is you can right click or control click on the image and say duplicate one photo, and then it will give you another version of that. So you can see I now have the duplicate here. And if I wanted this version to be without color, let me go to my color panel over here and let's just really simply, why don't we just remove color? You can see I have another version of the file. So I have my color version and I have my black and white version. And so really my main point was to get you excited about how you can iterate and how you can process images in multiple ways. Okay, I have one last photograph. In this one, I'm going to go through really quickly here, and I just want to highlight workflow technique when you use Lightroom and Photoshop. So here I have a photograph of Daniel Norris, pitcher for the Detroit Tigers, a celebrity. I'm going to brighten up my exposure, maybe add a little contrast, maybe bring the highlights down, shadows up. I'm going to decrease the overall vibrance and color saturation, just create more of a muted kind of color palette here. All right, I want to brighten up his eyes. Let's see how we can do that. This is really fun. Remember this tool? We've used this tool to darken things. What about brightening things? Go to exposure, brighten that up, add some clarity, a little bit of contrast, maybe a little bit of blue color, and then click and drag over an area of the image. Can you see how I have this little brightening effect here? At the bottom of the dialog over here, let me zoom in on that, we can change the feather value. So this would be harsh edge. This is soft edge. Typically, you want a higher feather value. All right, so we have that there. Then right click, control click, duplicate that. and bring it over. And then let's look at before and after. Can you see how we're kind of adding that brightness to his eyes in a nice, clean way? Okay. Well, when I photographed Daniel, he said, Chris, hey, I broke my nose. Is it okay? And I'm like, of course. And I said, well, I want to try to fix that. So I'm going to hit Command E on a Mac, Control E on Windows. Think E for edit. That's the way we send our images over to Photoshop. It will send them over with any of the adjustments that we've made here inside of Lightroom Classic. And I want to do this for two reasons. I want to do this one to talk about cropping. And the other reason is I want to do this so that we can talk about cropping and also fixing the broken nose, or at least part of that. Okay, well, if we zoom in on the image and we see the little broken nose there, we can grab a tool like the lasso tool and we can lasso up the cut on his nose. We can also lasso up. He has this little bruise on this part of his eye there. And we can go to the Edit pull-down menu and choose Content Aware Fill. Now, I don't have time to get into all of the ways that this works, but it's one of the most magical things in Photoshop. And basically, the green area, it's saying, I'm going to use this green area to cover up the other area. We can make changes here, so we can add to the selection if we feel like, hey, we didn't get enough of that out. We can do that. So we can go ahead and select those areas. And we can say, you know what, I also don't like how it's using part of the edge of the glasses to cover up the problem area. I don't know if you can see there's a little bit of a something there. So I'm just going to remove all that. Just say, hey, all I want you to do is just use skin. Don't use eyebrows. Don't use glasses. So this is the way we help Photoshop out, telling it what is good source area and what isn't. And in this case, it did a good job. Now removing the broken nose, we'll put this on a new layer. Or actually, let's just put it on the current layer and we'll click OK. So in this case, it saved the day. And the reason why I wanted to show this is because there's certain things you just can't do in Lightroom. You have to go to Photoshop, right? And here's another one. This image I want to crop so I can share it on Instagram. So I tap the C key for the crop tool. I go to 4:5 aspect ratio because that's the aspect ratio for Instagram. I want to share this on Instagram because I love this image. So I bring in my crop. I realize his head's tilted. So I start to tilt the crop and find the right way for this image to look, kind of so he's centered there. And as I do that, I realize there's nothing over here. There's no background. What am I going to do? Well, as long as we turn on Content Aware, same Content Aware that fixed the broken nose, it's right here inside of the crop tool. Now, when I press Enter or Return, what it's going to do is not only going to crop the image non-destructively, it's not going to delete pixels because I have that unchecked. It's going to invent new background, which wasn't even there. So there are so many things like this that we just can't do anywhere else. And so you can see here, it invented this whole new background. Now, it didn't get it quite exactly right. So how do we fix that? Lasso tool, just like we did with the broken nose. Highlight that, go to Edit, Content Aware Fill, because it's too bright. It kind of pulled in some of the white from the other side. And what we're going to see is it's going to say, hey, what do you want me to pull in? I want darker green. Great. Click OK. And then now we're going to see, yeah, that background, all this stuff, this right here didn't exist. Photoshop invented it. All right. Well, as you can see, I get really excited about all of these things, and it's so much fun to share them with you. My deepest hope is that all of this provided you with a little bit of insight and inspiration to how you can capture and create better photographs yourself. And hey, I would love to keep in touch with you. So you can find me on social media just by searching for my name, Chris Orwig. And if you're interested in any of my training or my most recent book, be sure to look that one up as well. But most importantly, I hope that this gave you a little kind of, spark of inspiration. And I hope that it helps you to create better portraits yourself. And I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining me. See you guys. Bye for now.